Has expired. Senator Destiari.
Mr Acting Deputy President, I rise to address the quite astonishing claims by Senator Cormann in this chamber that the groundswell of disgust with the dismantling of the consumer protections in FOFA is some sort of Labor conspiracy. Mr Acting Deputy President, Senator Cormann has actually shifted his lines of attack in the past fortnight. He's pivoted from claiming to be reducing red tape to now claim the concerns of consumer advocates such as Choice, National Seniors and the Council on the Ageing is some sort of stitch-up by the Labor movement. I can assure this chamber that the pensioners and everyday Australians rallying against Senator Cormann's changes do not have any vested interests, they do not stand to profit, and they do not represent some kind of grand conspiracy against this government. Mr Acting Deputy President, Senator Cormann's allegations in this chamber are absurd. I want to take some time this afternoon to put the comments of a broad coalition of concerned consumers on the public record. You will notice a common theme in the comments. Each one is offered in the best interests of consumers. Take Michael O'Neill from National Seniors. In a June 20 media release, he states emphatically, quote, "The Abbott government has clearly put big business ahead of consumers." He went on to reinforce that, and I quote him again, "Australians should not be paying commissions for advice they do not receive. Each investor should see full fee disclosures annually, and we all should know that the nice lady at the bank is being well rewarded for the product she's encouraged us to buy." Mr Acting Deputy President, I challenge Senator Cormann to stand up here today and state for the Hansard record that National Seniors are acting as a front for the Labor movement. And how about Alan Kirkland of Choice, Australia's leading consumer advocacy organisation? Mr Kirkland was equally blunt. Quote, "Choice is calling on federal politicians to oppose all legislation and regulation that will wind back essential protection for consumers seeking financial advice." Mr Kirkland reminds senators that, quote, "conflicted and poor financial advice has cost consumers billions and in too many cases led to people losing their homes and their life savings. This is why consumer protections were originally needed and exactly why they should not be removed." Mr Acting Deputy President, indeed it has been removed by these regulations. I challenge Senator Cormann to stand here today in this chamber and state for the Hansard record that Choice are acting as a front for the Labor movement. Then there's Ian Yates from the Council on the Ageing, known as CODA, who put out a statement on the 20th of June with a headline that summed it up quite nicely, and I quote, "Wind back of FOFA protections still threatens future of financial advice industry and older Australians' assets and income." Indeed, to avoid the slurs we've heard from Senator Cormann, CODA went on to great lengths to say and state, quote, "To be very clear, CODA is not siding with any special interest in this debate and resents any suggestion we are acting on strong legal advice about the impact of these reforms and deep concern expressed by members, and we would oppose the FOFA changes whether they were proposed by the government or by Labor." CODA went on, calling out very clearly who wins and who loses from Senator Cormann's sweetheart deal with the big banks. Quote, "The big four banks and their push-selling business model will be one of the major winners if the legislation is watered down, at the cost of their consumers being vulnerable to the less than optimum financial outcomes." Mr Acting Deputy President, is Senator Cormann happy to come into this chamber today and say, just as he's been saying with everyone else, that CODA, that Council on the Ageing, is somehow part of some grand conspiracy from the Labor movement? And then there's Alan Kohler, who just today, one of the most respected journalists in this country, who just today said, and I quote, "The system of financial advice is inherently and deliberately deceptive because the most effective sales environment is where the customer doesn't realise what he or she is being sold. Banks use the term advisor or planner as a synonym for salesperson. Clients think an advisor advises. It is at heart simply a matter of semantics. The coalition government is on the caper. Finance Minister Matthias Cormann has made some changes to the proposed Freedom of Financial FOFA amendments to clarify his undying opposition to sales commissions for advisors planners. But, and again I'm quoting Alan Kohler here, there are still plenty of carve-outs that allow banks to reward them for selling. Mr Acting Deputy President, is Senator Cormann going to come into this chamber today and claim that Mr Kohler is acting as part of grand conspiracy in the Labor movement? And then there's Simon Hall from Professional Planners magazine, who last week came and talked about the absurdity of the trade-off underpin the government's logic for dismantling FOFA, where, and I quote, the interests of individuals are being traded off against, quote, business, against the enrichment of individual financial planners and against bank shareholders. At some point, someone has to stand up and say that the most important people in this saga are the people who own the money, not the financial planners, not financial planning businesses, not the banks, and not the bank shareholders. Mr Acting Deputy President, I don't think anybody could be any clearer. Criticism of Senator Cormann's actions don't stop, though, with those acting on behalf of consumers, even though there is not one single consumer organisation in this country, not one single consumer organisation, not one single organisation that's responsible for dealing with the victims of financial crisis who have come out and supported. The criticisms don't stop there. Professor Dimity Smith from the University of New South Wales Faculty of Law concluded in February that, and I quote, there is a big gap between requiring an advisor to act in a client's best interest and the advice being merely appropriate. Or Paul Latimer, an associate professor at Monash University, who plainly stated in submissions to the Senate Economics Committee that, quote, the proposed amendments to weaken the best interest duty have been barely noticed by the public, not aware of what might be at stake for standards of professional advice on their investments and their life savings. Mr Acting Deputy President, Senator Cormann's slur against the good people and these organisations is as offensive as it is ridiculous. What does Senator Cormann actually think is going on here? That these comments are the result of some kind of sweetheart deal with the Labor movement, the ACTU perhaps, and every other conspiracy? As I said before, they're ridiculous and they're offensive. Make no mistake, there is only one side of this place that's acting on behalf of a handful of vested interests. These regulations are expressly and blatantly designed to enrich the bottom line of the big banks at the expense of the bank balances of ordinary consumers. This is the best deal the banks could ever have imagined, courtesy of a government that will do anything to placate their mates, no matter who loses along the way. It is doubly offensive that the Senator has decided to introduce these changes just a week after a devastating Senate report into the scandalous behaviour of Commonwealth Bank financial advisers. The regulatory changes introduced by Senator Cormann will see the return of many of the practices that we on this side of the chamber, and at one point both sides of the chamber, tried to end. There is little wonder there's a queue a mile long of people, regular concerned citizens, pensioners, consumer advocates, financial journalists and law professors calling on the government to abandon these changes. Mr Acting Deputy President, the people in this chamber have a responsibility. We have a responsibility to those that don't have voices for themselves, not the big banks, not the big financial planners, not the handful of people who are looking and eagerly awaiting for a return to the good old days of financial planning where they could clip the ticket on the way through. We have a greater responsibility than that. And it's unfortunate and sad that the Senator has decided to make this some kind of debate about a Labor conspiracy. There is no Labor conspiracy. You have choice. You have the Council of Seniors on the Ageing. You have National Seniors. You have every single consumer organisation in this country opposed to these changes. I call on all senators to do the right thing by their constituents, to disallow these government changes and to make sure that the voices of those who can't be heard
Senator
are heard.
Dastyari, your time has expired. Senator Bushby.